Thank you, Senator Wright, and members of the committee for holding this. I'm Kathy Ree-Heiss-Boyd. I'm president of the Western States Petroleum Association, and we represent 27 companies that explore, produce, refine, and market petroleum and petroleum products in 6 states: Washington, Oregon, California, Arizona, Nevada, and Hawaii. Don't get to go there too much, though. We've been really constructively involved in AB 32 since its inception, since 2006, and then again in 2009 with the low carbon fuel standard. I know this hearing is dedicated to cap and trade, but there is a linkage to the low carbon fuel standard, and both of those have some huge implications on our ability to supply the California marketplace. And I want to leave those thoughts with you. Certainly, I don't have enough time to go through them in detail and would love to have that opportunity because I think they're important issues, but I will highlight them for you today. So much has occurred since then, and our thought process has certainly evolved. But one thing we came very clear at the end of last year was this idea of the cumulative impacts of these regulations on one sector, in particular the refining sector in California, and the 14 refineries that operate here, as you well know, 6 in Southern California and 5 in Northern California and a few others. When we brought that to the attention of the Air Resources Board, they agreed. They passed a resolution that noted the cumulative impacts could be severe and needed to be looked at, and so we embarked on a study to do that. We hired an internationally well-known firm called the Boston Consulting Group, and their job was to analyze the impacts on these 14 refiners in California from cap and trade, bringing fuels under cap and trade, the low carbon fuel standard, and something known as the Clean Fuels Outlet. Why did we pick those 4? They all come together at the same time on one industry in a very short period between now and 2015. The unintended consequences are severe, and not that they cannot be corrected, but we want to bring them to your attention because they're very important. You have a presentation that I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time with, but it's in front of you, and I want to tick through a few things. It'll take 5 minutes, but I think I want to leave it with you so you have something to refer to. The first page there, page 2, is really what the LAO office was talking about in surrendering allocations over time. That big blue bar you see that's escalating over time is what the refiners have to surrender as they also comply with their reduction in the 2% cap per year. When you look at that compared to other industries, it's severe. And so just one piece of the cap and trade program over time, they surrender a lot of their allocations because they are not deemed highly trade exposed. What the BCG report, Boston Consulting Group, determines is this industry is indeed highly trade exposed and should be treated as such. So the surrendering of allocations and the costs associated with those are fairly large for this industry compared to others. The second one, my favorite, I call it the Dorothy Rothrock slide. This has been used in other forums, but it's very illustrative. And these escalating downward dives you see there in the pink are those declining allowances. So you can tie the first sheet to the second sheet. We surrender those allocations over time. There's large dollars associated with that surrendering. You see the numbers there in the billions. And really what the LAO was talking about is the white space on top. That's the declining cap over time. That's 2% per year. That's what the requirements of the law are to achieve. So that's the white space. And everything below that is the additional cost from surrendering allocations to those that are not deemed highly trade exposed. That's what you've heard every speaker talk about. So this becomes this surrendering of allowances over time becomes a very core concern in the cap and trade program. And again, not necessary to meeting the declining cap, the white space. The next slide is the next piece that causes concern. We just talked about the stationary source piece, which is really the orange lines in this graph. You may ask yourself, what are those big bars that then start, again, same time frame, 2015? That's when fuels go under the cap and trade program. There are no free allocations for the emissions from the fuels. They enter the program at 2015. And in addition to those allocation costs you saw on the previous page that we surrender, transportation fuels come over in 2015 and blow the costs out of the water. So that's the other concern we have, is dealing with transportation fuels in a cap and trade program in 2015 time period. At the same time, you're dealing with surrendering massive amounts of allocation and raising the cost. The next three slides, I'm not going to read. I'm going to point a couple things to you. These are the findings of the BCG report, the Boston Consulting Group, and again, look at this immediate concern we have in 2015. The program goes to 2020, certainly. We see some big ramifications in 2015. We are talking with the Air Resources Board about these ramifications, and we'll see where those conversations lead. But what you see very quickly is that the refining industry in California, we're not a utility, we're not bound to this market. We have to find where we can supply fuel cost effectively. With these regulations hitting us all at once in 2015, what the Boston Consulting Group determines is the refiners start to behave differently. They start to look for their best opportunity to sell their fuel. And with things like the low carbon fuel standard requiring you to meet certain elements of selling your fuel in California, in about 2015 that becomes a problem. It really makes it difficult for them to supply this marketplace. So because of that cost differential, they look for other markets that don't have these regulations, places like Hawaii, places like the Northwest, places like Phoenix, and places like Mexico, which have a very growing marketplace and have a lack of refining capacity. So when that cost differential becomes too much in California, they'll look to sell their products elsewhere, and so you get an export. Instead of supplying the California marketplace, you have the refiners reacting in an export situation. The other reason they do that is the low carbon fuel standard in 2015 becomes infeasible. There is nothing we can blend in our fuel to make it less carbon intensive. Then certainly we know we have corn-based ethanol now. That gets us a little bit. It certainly will not meet the compliance obligations of the low carbon fuel standard. Then we ship as much as Brazilian sugarcane ethanol as we can because it's lower carbon intensive, and we do that to the point that we can't do that anymore because, as you know, ethanol isn't totally compatible with engines at high volumes. So it makes a very difficult situation again. Can't comply, you've got increasing costs, you're surrendering allocations. If you don't sell fuel here, you have other markets, and the market starts to shift, according to the BCG. Basically, they say about 5 to 7 of the refiners shut down in California. They turn into terminals. We lose 30 to 40% of the refining capacity, and those that are left supply as much as they can, given how much biofuels they're able to put in their fuel, and then the rest is exported outside the state. You have potential shortages in that time period and escalating costs, and you will not have the substitution of electric vehicles or hydrogen vehicles or even an infrastructure to run E85 fuel flex vehicles in this short time period to react to that marketplace. So there is a very short-term problem that gets set up for the state of California. The next page is what that means to job. 28 to 51,000 jobs are lost, $4.4 billion a year in tax revenue to the state of California. And then the last one is an estimate by Boston Consulting Group of cost recovery for transportation fuels in the range of 49 cents per gallon to $1.83 per gallon by 2020. And if the regulation continues as designed, could escalate up to $2.70 per gallon. That's broken down by each of the regulations because they looked at them independently. So you see 14 to 69 cents as a result of the cap and trade program, and the other big chunk, 33 to $1.06 from the low carbon fuel standard. So I'm leaving this with you to contemplate. I'd love to have additional conversation. There's 2 other graphs in there that just give you an idea. For instance, if we were able to bring all the Brazilian ethanol from Brazil to California to try to comply with the low carbon fuel standard, the entire country makes 360 million barrels a day, and we would need 554 million barrels a day to meet the low carbon fuel standard, more than the entire country makes. So they would have to build an additional biofacility to do that, and between now and 2015 that would be quite difficult. The other difficulty in switching to that much Brazilian sugarcane ethanol, given the current vehicle technology, we have about 270,000 fuel flex vehicles in the state of California that can burn 85% ethanol. But of course we have 22 million vehicles that don't, so you'd have to make a complete turnover of the vehicle fleet and put an E85 pump at every gas station that doesn't currently exist, if you could get the entire country's production here, which isn't enough. So it sets up a very difficult situation. The last page shows you the change in trade flows of gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel as a result